Hi, welcome back. So we are in chapter 2, technical setup, at the last outline of this chapter, and that is to discuss a project setup and essentials. As we have explored so far, the essential ideas from academic and also technical perspective, we are about now to launch the actual progress to establish the two applications that we intend to accomplish in this book. First of all, the choice of the programming language. As we said, there are a number of them out there. Feel free to actually alter whatsoever programming language you feel yourself you are comfortable with. But personally, I have relied on the use of Python for quite a number of years now, but that doesn't mean that this is the only option. Actually, it depends on. This is what I personally prefer. Now, if you need actually to navigate much more details into the actual use of this language from various perspectives, looking at different libraries and frameworks that go hand by hand with Python, feel free to check our third book, Prediction from the Start to the End, where I have the entire appendix just talking about the use of Python. So I will assume that you have a prerequisite knowledge, at least at basic level, on the use of Python. But I could say this is not gonna be hard things for you to go through. So now the second thing, maybe we need to look at the use of a database. So the choice was to look for SQLite 3. Now, basically, SQLite 3 in general, it is actually a C language library. They implement small, fast, and self-contained and high reliability, full-featured. But I could say that it's not directly comparable, of course, to client-server SQL database engines such as MySQL or Oracle or PostgreSQL. Hence, also you take into consideration that the syntax of SQLite is almost identical to any other database query. Now, here is the point where we need to talk about the PySide 6, which is also known as the Qt for Python. It is actually a Python library to create a GUI applications. Now, here is the official website of or the documentation website for Qt, where you can see it over official Python binding for Qt, which enables you to use Python to write your Qt application. Now, before we explore the last element of the tool that we need to be relying on for those two projects, maybe we could go and discuss the IDE, where I'm going to be organizing all the workflow on that. So Visual Studio Code is actually a lightweight but powerful source code editor, which run on a desktop and is actually available for different operating systems like Windows, Mac, operating system Linux, and has rich ecosystem of extensions for other languages. So once you install the Visual Studio Code, you'll be welcome with the options bullets such as the start, which are the standard of a new file or open folder or file whatsoever. Also the recent that they've been working on. Also some walk through, which is a very, very good actually documented. There are a lot of things that you really may want to check out on your own, like to customize the editor itself in a different way. So for example, here on the top, you might toggle here the primary side or the left side here. Maybe you want to toggle also the other side when you have some other features. But usually I like to do the following, and I'm telling you what's my style and this is how I feel comfortable with. First of all, I toggle this one and I create a main folder that holds the entire project that I'm working on. In this case, for example, I have the VS Code folder. Perhaps usually this option of a source control where you can get to create a repository to connect to the GitHub if you like. Now, one more important thing I found it very useful in extensions. You can like install some of the extensions which are quite a bit powerful, like for example, Python extension, as we said. It helps you once you are writing code in Python to actually recognize the language and try to help you by auto-completion. As you will see later on when we start, that we need to create a virtual environment. Of course, you have to install Python first. I should have said that from the very beginning. Now, to install Python, visiting the official website by going to the download site here, of course, you will encounter with the latest version of Python, which is 3.12. I have installed this. However, you will face some problems. I don't know, up to the record of this session, there are many new frameworks and libraries did not work well with 3.12, so I have to downgrade that to 3.11, which is the most stable one. Especially, for example, if you would like to work with TensorFlow, they didn't go hand by hand with 3.12, so they have only to work with 3.11. Even the proper documentation in TensorFlow, they have already mentioned 3.9 to 3.11. The only Python versions that they are able to work with, but 3.12 is not supported yet. I do advise you personally to install both if you like, install one of them. It's all up to you. Now, when it comes to Visual Studio, and depends on the way you install Python. So I create a folder for Python called 3.10 and 3.11. So I would have two different versions of Python. And once I would like to start, I create my virtual environment and I follow up with that. Later on, we'll see how we do that. Once you do so, I like to open the actual terminal here by toggling the panels. You can create many terminals, as many as you like here. And of course, it offers you the work on the virtual environment as well. So basically, I am already connected to my virtual environments. I'm not gonna talk about it for now. How did I activate the virtual environment? But we will see in the following project. By the way, the two virtual environments, one of them for 3.12 connected and 3.11. So I have just named them virtual environment 3.12 and virtual environment 3.11. So I have a folder here called introduction, just completely a new folder, easy to create a folder, use nothing special, create a files inside. So I create 4 different documents to walk you through the work of PySide. First of all, to understand PySide or the workflow of PySide, there are a number of outlines I would like to tell you that they are crucially important for you to capture. Number 1, signals and event. Once again, this program, it isn't about the use of PySide. I'm not teaching you how to actually utilize this library, but I'm telling you, if you'd like to utilize this library or framework, there are many other materials explaining in details, of course, but I would say that if you like to check on your own the documentation, you have to focus on the mechanism. How does actually signals and events work in PySide? And what is the flow chart, if you will? Next, you have to check something related to the widgets, which is actually the main of the entire project. Because when we talk about GUI is a number of widgets that includes buttons, labels, etc. This is what the user is interacting with. So there's a whole lot of information that you have to understand. And then the layout, because those widgets have to be fixed inside the layout. Just if you take for a simple illustration, if you would have application looks like this, this is your GUI in general, right? And the user is interacting with that. So what is happening here? Now, these are widgets, right? The buttons, the labels, maybe some other features are out there. And then you have to fix them in such a way that you see this is the work of the layout. So the layout, it is responsible to organize the appearance of this GUI in general. Now, as signals and event, what is happening, the user is interacting with one of these widgets, for example, by clicking a button, and it should be connected to some sort of socket, sending a signal to execute something from the backend. So the backend here is running to look what the actual request from the user, and the response will be happening here. GUI will be responding with a certain message or interact with the user. So these are the 3 important things I would like you to know how the work of PySide is working actually. Now, in addition to that, PySide looking for toolbars, menus, queue actions, also dialogues and alerts, which is all actually involving within the framework here. You could look at some other topic related to transmitting extra data with Qt signals. For example, sometimes the user is not only clicking a button, but actually sending something to the back end. Maybe you want to insert something to the database. Maybe you want to make certain interaction with the back end for some purpose. Also, you could look at much more advanced topics related to the Q-thread pooling. When you have your Qt application is running on one Q application, so I'm going to talk about it in a while. You have to understand this is running on one thread of your CPU, so it occupies the entire session. But however, in some applications you need actually multiple threads, so you need one thread to run this app and you need another app to be run on another thread. So these are an important features when it comes to Q-thread pool class. Also, you could look at some Q process to run external programs. And one of the most powerful new advancement of this project is working with something called model view architecture, which is quite a bit interesting. So basically it relies on a model view diagram. Now you could look also for graphing perspective. You could use the PyQt graph or the mat plot library. In this project, the second one, we are gonna utilize the matplot library, but feel free, you could also explore the PyQt graph on your own as well. You could use a QPainter, a bitmap graphics. You could use animation even. I mean, if you are designing game or so. And finally, of course, you could look at the subject of how to package a PySide application using the packaging PySide 6 application, which we're gonna, of course, work on it as well. So this is the general idea of PyQt. But now when it comes to much more technicality, you have to understand on the mechanism. I would like to tell you something related to the background of the entire mechanism of PySide 6, which is, once again, this is not a program to discuss PySide 6, but I would like just you to know what is going on. As you will see now on the main framework of PySide 6, when we use it, what is the most important things we have to do is to get something called Q application. Basically, the idea here, it says, as we said, event and signals. Usually we will have number of event like event 1, 2, and 3, and number of event, which is actually what is the users interacting with the application. Now, basically, these guys will be inside some kind of a list called the interactions or the event queue usually. Now, basically, they are collected and is been sent one by one to something called the event loop. And basically, the event loop is going always to check this queue. So take one by one, start to execute them, depends on the priority, depends on their place. So every application, every GUI have one queue application, which is actually centered around the idea of a queue of event. It's a loop. We'll keep checking out this one of list and sending to the event handler, which is the event handler will take care, okay, well, what is this event is looking for? And of course, this event handler will do the acceptance or the propagate around that. And finally, will send to the handler list. Once this loop is keep going on and on and on, it just cut off once we exit this loop. So basically, the concept itself, it should be familiar with you if you have worked before with the different framework of C++. Now, you have to know that the most two important startup for PySide is to look something called the Q application and the Q widget. Let's go back now here to the first just test to show you the general idea of PySide. First of all, after you install PySide, which is nothing but you install pip install PySide 6, you could first of all look at the Q widgets, which we said this is the main class that contain actually most of the important widget, Q application and the Q widget. Beside them, there are two actually other main modules, Qt GUI and Qt Core. You can check them all as you like. Next, we import something called the sys. I'm going to explore in a while. So basically what we need to create an instance of the Q application. As we said, the Q application will carry all the event in that queue that we've been talking about. Now, sometimes if your application is interacting with some terminal command, accepting input from the user, you need to import the systor.args. Otherwise, you can just leave with an empty list. Finally, you create an instance of the queue widget. Now, this is going to be my main window. And finally, I have to show the window because this is hidden by default. This is my loop. This is exactly the loop that I have just illustrated before. Now, this loop will keep going on again and again and again until the app is called the exit function. Now, if I run this test1 application, and here we go, we can see nothing special, but just only an interface. Now, this interface, it is a widget, as we can see here. Basically, it's not going to be a good idea just to run the entire application over a queue widget. That's why if we move to the second examples here to show you what is a queue widget, you could see directly here in the previous test, I just wrote queue widget, which was like an interface, but actually queue widget can be replaced directly with the widgets. Instead of queue widget, I could have imported push button, which is a button, nothing special. So if I would have to run once again here, you would see that the screen now nothing, but it is actually a button. And of course, this is not something perfectly what we need, but I wanted to show you that the queue widget in principle, it is actually the button or the label or whatsoever you have. Now, to make the things much more sophisticated, we could move to the real implementation of something called the queue main window. It is a pre-made widget which actually provides a lot of standard window features. You will make use of it in the apps anyway. So it includes like toolbars, menus, status bar. One important things you need to know once you actually call this class or inherit from this class. So I'm creating here completely on my own main class, and then I do inherit all the features of queue main window, which is going to be actually subclass of that. The important things in the essential instructor of the init, when we subclass a Qt class, we must always call the super init function to allow Qt to set up the object correctly. From here, now what we can do, inside the self, you will see now many different things. Since I inherited everything from the queue main window, is the most important. We'll be looking, for example, the central widget, but we're gonna go around this in a different way when we start actually utilize another application which is gonna do the interface for us, and then we will bring that after we convert it into a Python file. We're gonna import that as our main window. But for now, we are just relying on a self-made widget, such as, for example, we set the window title here. I could set the push button, set like kind of a size for the central main window. You could also, of course, add the button. So the idea here, it works just like so. You get the central widget, which is inherited from the queue main window, and push the button is going to be within that. Actually, if I run this one, I go to the queue application, I just create one queue application. Every application has only one queue application. And here's my main window. My main window is the class which carry everything inside. And then, of course, I have to show it. Now, if I would have to run this, this is now a main window. It isn't actually as before a widget. And this main window, inside it will be a lot of widgets will be attached and organized with a layout as we have just introduced before. Now, when things get really, really complicated as the application we are intend to do, this is the time where we need to check something called the Qt Designer. Now, in order to install Qt Designer, in fact, you have to go to the Qt official website, install the installer, and from there you can actually install the entire framework or library, and one of the features come with it is a Qt Designer. Alternatively, you might want to access some other source to install Qt Designer alone as an XE. So it's all options for you. I'm not gonna interfere with that. Now, basically, when you start the Qt Designer, it's very simple, basic. So once you create this main window, basically you get the actual presentation. If you remember Visual Basic, if you ever worked on it, it's similar to the same concept. So basically on the left here and on the right is the main important things to observe: the object inspector and the widget box. In the widget box, you got the layout, you got spacers, buttons, you got item view, modules, containers, input widget, display widget, etc. And you got the formal, of course, toolbar here. Now on the right hand side, everything you add here, you can start to control. But the main idea is we just now created the Q, the main window, if you remember, the Q main window class. An important things within it called the central widget, which we were actually creating some features like setting the titles or etc. So basically, if you would like to, for example, drag a push button here, so you have control over the view here. You get the push button, you get, for example, some other display such as the label here. If you go to preview, you could see this, what is the main window looks like. So I could have done this by code by creating a Q push button widget and a text label widget. However, using the Qt designer, it really helps you if you have the design in your hand to make it manually, which we're going to do actually step by step when we do our first application. So I do encourage you, it's not hard to figure out on your own what is the structure. It's quite simple and straightforward. Once this is done, we need actually now to convert this into Python code. If you look at the code here, this is a C++ code. It isn't Python. The actual interface now, it's in XML format, and we need to take that XML and convert it into a Python. And so library does this for us, which we're gonna be exploring quite a bit soon. So to sum up, these are the important setup or essentials that we need to be familiar with in order to start our project. Once again, the Python is the programming language we're going to use. SQLite 3 is a database we relies on. PySite 6 is the main package or the project we're going to use from Qt to execute the GUI with the backend with Python. So it's going to be responsible for our GUI, so to speak. Qt design will help us to make our design, all of which will be running over the IDE of Microsoft Visual Code. And in addition to that, later on we will see, we will also be using an external server, a Linux server, which is going to be running the streaming data. When we reach to that point, I will be explaining further in details. But for now, these are the 4 important elements that you have to understand essentially. So now it is the time to start with the first project in this book. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. I will see you then.